Good morning, Albuquerque and El Paso. My name is Daniel Garcia, in case you don't know who I am. I actually grew up, born and raised in Albuquerque, and in June of 2013, I was actually baptized into Christ. Armin Day reached out to me one day as we were finishing up umpiring a baseball game, and long story short, he helped me out along with a big handful of you in Albuquerque, and I actually made Jesus Lord, and greatest decision I've ever made. And there are many of you who are watching this back in Albuquerque who, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here following Jesus. And words can't describe the gratitude that I personally have for the Albuquerque church and all those who played such an instrumental role in my becoming a disciple. And so thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. I miss you all the time, and I can't wait to visit you again soon. Just wanted to give you a quick life update. So Nadia and Nadia's my wife, we're coming up really soon on our first anniversary. We got married August 3rd of last year, and marriage has been tons of fun, especially when you have a lady as amazing as Nadia is. Here's a picture of us just from the other day. We went out into a spot about 15 minutes west of Fort Collins and did some trail riding on our mountain bikes, and we've just been having a ton of fun. If you would have asked us what our first year of marriage would have looked like, it would be nothing like 2020. But honestly, we've had so much extra time to get to know each other and spend time together and grow. And of course, no conflict because, we have a perfect marriage. And no, I'm just kidding. Of course, we've had some, but marriage has been amazing. God has truly blessed me with this special woman. And together we lead the campus ministry and the young professionals ministry in Fort Collins, and incredibly grateful to be doing that. So please pray for Fort Collins. If you're looking for extra things to pray for, we'd appreciate it. But we just finished leading the first ever Fort Collins teen camp, because if you're alive right now and watching this video, you know that 2020 has had absolutely no chill whatsoever. And so the Rocky Mountain teen camp was canceled, unfortunately, for our teens. And so Mike and Jody, the people who lead our church, asked Nadia and I if we would use some of our spare time in the summer to put together a little camp for the 8 teens, 9 teens in Fort Collins. And that was exhausting, but Nadia and I just finished that. But it was a great time. And so praying that you guys are encouraged. And I'm just extremely grateful for Armin and Josh for allowing me to encourage you guys with the lesson today. But without further ado, let's get into it. The text that we're going to be in this morning is John chapter 9. And before we jump into John chapter 9, I'm going to just give a little recap. It doesn't say exactly, but it appears that the end of John 8 merges into John 9. Like the chronological order seems like it's kind of a progression. And so what's happening is that Jesus just finished being in a dispute with the Pharisees. And, it began all throughout the course of John chapter 8, and it ends with Jesus making this staggering statement about who he is when he says, "Before Abraham was, I am." And, for the Pharisees at that time to hear someone else use those words and proclaim that they are in fact deity by saying "I am" was blasphemy, and it infuriated them. And so essentially they decide that they're going to pick up rocks and try to stone Jesus. And Jesus does Jesus things, and he decides that he's going to poof and disappear amongst the crowd and continue on with his life. Now, that's kind of where we pick up where we left off here. So let's pick up in John chapter 9, verse 1. It says, "As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' 'Neither this man nor his parents sinned,' said Jesus, 'but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world.' After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. 'Go,' he told him, 'wash in the pool of Siloam.' This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he said himself, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. So I want to go ahead and start off this lesson by focusing in on verse 1. He said, "As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents?'" And like I said before, we don't know exactly in the timeline where this happens, but it appears that it's a direct continuation from Jesus kind of finishing up with the Pharisees in that sharp dispute that he had. And it seems like in this situation, he's thrown into another really difficult situation. And like I said before, 2020 has been crazy. And so we're probably no strangers to difficult situations in this particular year. I won't even begin to list the struggles that our world has endured in the past 6 months because frankly, we don't have the time. And in the text that we're studying today, Jesus is tasked with answering a question that doesn't have an easy answer to deliver. And I can relate when dealing with really difficult situations like loss or sickness or heartache or oppression. I don't always have the answer to those questions. And the task that we're given by the scriptures in really difficult times is to simply trust God. But how can we trust God when it seems like the world can be caving in depending on what day it is? And that's the goal of our time this morning, is that we would walk away from the lesson and remember who God is, and that we may trust him wholeheartedly during life's biggest struggles. The title of our lesson this morning is called Trust the Process. Point number 1. The first point is trust the process even in your doubts. Now, when something challenging happens in life, one of the first and most natural responses to this situation is to question, why did this happen, or how could this happen to me? And the way that Jesus' disciples reacted to seeing this man that was born blind was to know why this man was born blind. And they took it a step further. They actually, according to what they were used to growing up, they asked the question, was this man's blindness a result of the parents' sin, or was it a result of his sin? And they actually assumed that this was a punishment that one of them deserved. And I want to ask you this question. What answers do you come up with for challenging situations that you either endure or witness yourself? Do you sometimes struggle with assuming that, what happened is a punishment that's coming from God because of a direct situation that you maybe were involved with, or a mistake that maybe you made, and it's now coming back to haunt you? Do you get frustrated and maybe think, wow, I've been really faithful, God. How could you do this? Maybe blame him? Or is it maybe to question God? Or lastly, is it to glorify God? Verse 3, Jesus gives us our answer, and he says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, before we continue, I want to give a bit of a disclaimer. Jesus gives a very direct answer to a very specific question. And the example, or the answer that the disciples received, meaning it was not his parents or him that sinned, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed through him. That doesn't mean that this is the answer for your direct situation. It just means that in this particular situation, this man's blindness wasn't a punishment. It was rather a part of God's purpose for his life. And here's an example of how this could be worked out in a different situation. Because if you kind of analyze the text, it's not completely out of the question that this man or his mom could have sinned and thus something have happened to him. Let me give you an example. Like, drunkenness is a sin according to the scriptures and according to God. If a mother who is expecting a child were to give in to drunkenness, it is possible that there will be adverse effects that'll be passed down to her baby. Something like fetal alcohol syndrome is an example of that. That would be a direct action that the mother took, a sin that the mother committed that would affect her child in the future. That's one way that this baby could maybe inherit a problem due to the mother's action. But in this instance of the blind man, and in many other instances, God not only allows painful things, challenging things, certain struggles to occur, he orchestrates them to the very last detail for his own glory and goodness. And this lesson kind of goes from 0 to 100. The question that I have for us is, are we willing to live lives where God can put us into difficult situations, cause challenging things to happen, all so that we could be a part of his story? Is that okay with you? Because if I'm honest, that doesn't sound appealing. Like in one way it does. Yeah, God, totally use me for whatever your plan is, use me. But that's easy for me to say when I'm not facing a struggle, right? Because when I read this, it seems like it would make more sense that, for a man to be born blind, a result of a mistake that someone made, that would make sense to me. But the fact that that Jesus is saying, no, this man was born blind for this moment here. He was born blind and lived his whole life as an outcast so that I could show people who I really am. That doesn't make me feel good unless I know about the character of God. So what steps can we take to grasp this concept? What steps can we take to trust the process even in our doubts? A famous passage in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. If you go to Hobby Lobby, you'll probably see it on some of their decor you can buy. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." And like I said, the typical response people would give you in a difficult time is just to trust God. But it's easier said than done, right? There are 3 primary anchors that I rely on when trying to trust the process in my doubts. And the first one is to remember who God is. God is the provider of all things. And we could camp out on this point for the rest of the lesson, but I won't do that. But here's a couple of the traits about God. He's the provider of all things. So what things has God provided you with? Paul is rebuking the church in Corinth when he says, "For what do you have that you did not receive?" Boasting is foolishness. And so anyhow, we've received everything from God. We've received the breath in our lungs. Every gift we possess is a result only of what God has poured out for us. The heart that beats inside of us, the eyes that allow us to see, the ears that allow us to hear, the freedom that we have, the love in our hearts, the peace that transcends understanding. Not to mention every other gift that we have. It's all a direct result from God. So if we remember who God is as provider, then we'll have no problem when God chooses to take something back, or when God chooses to orchestrate something else for his glory. Because how could we get upset with a God who already gave us everything we have? The second anchor that I want to point out to you is remember where we are going. Revelation 21 is a description from the Apostle John about what we have to look forward to in our life that's coming. And I don't care who you are, you've had a moment in life where you've thought, I cannot wait to be done with this craziness. I don't want to be here. I don't want to see anger and violence in the world. I don't want to be at the hands of someone causing that pain. I don't want to deal with the depression or the anxiety or the physical pain of an illness or the emotional pain of losing someone you love. Revelation chapter 21, and I'll just paraphrase it, it talks about how in the new heavens and new earth, there'll be no more pain, no more tears. Everything will be made brand new. Jesus will declare it finished, and we will have no pain. Can you think about that? A life with no pain, no suffering, no tears. Old things passed away, new things have come. Just a glorious new earth where all we do is praise and worship God, experiencing perfection for the rest of eternity. We have the hope of forever waiting for us. And so if you're having a hard time trusting the process, then we must remember that the amount of time we spend on earth is just a mist. It's a vapor that will be here today and gone tomorrow. So just hang on tight. Remember where you're going. That's anchor number 2. Anchor number 3 is remember who is blessed. If you read the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, the people who are blessed is the poor in spirit, those who mourn, right? And reading that seems like it's the opposite of what real life is. Being someone who mourns is the one who's blessed. But if you think about it this way, all throughout history, in the Bible, we see examples of people who are brought low, who God then exalts and lifts up. And the people who think they're everything are the ones that are brought to nothing. So think about it. To be poor in spirit is to be blessed. Because being poor in spirit means that you know exactly who you are before God. The ones who are poor in spirit rejoice at knowing that Christ is their divine physician. But the ones who are prideful, the ones who have life all together, they're the ones who have an extremely hard time knowing God and have an extremely hard time knowing that they need help. And so if you're being brought low for any given situation, if we have a mind like God's, we will consider this opportunity as one to rejoice in, like James chapter 1. Or like in 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul says, when I am weak, then I am strong. That weakness is perfected. Christ's power is perfected in our weaknesses. The weaknesses is where God operates in our lives. Now, I recognize many of you might not know them, but there's a couple in Fort Collins named Lewis and Mary Goins, and they just moved away to Kansas, to Wichita. But, I mean, this is a couple where they're just untouchable. They've both endured great physical pain and illness in their own lives firsthand, but you would never know it by spending some time with them. I mean, Lewis has had probably 6 or 7 back surgeries, always hurting, but when he sees you, he gives you a bear hug. He gives you a Pete Henkel hug. And this man's got a back that's barely held together by some titanium rods. And you think, and Mary, again, she's faced an illness for quite some time, but you would never know it because all they do is pour out and pour out and pour out. People that adopt the mind of Christ and of God can trust the process even in their doubt because they know that God will deliver time and time again. And the second point that I have for you is actually similar. It's trust the process because of who Christ is. And I just want to highlight 2 attributes of Jesus that really help me to trust the process. The first attribute is that Christ is compassionate. Again, Jesus just came from almost being stoned when he's kind of faced with this situation where he eventually heals this young man. And I don't know, I couldn't help but think about my reaction when I'm faced with a difficult situation immediately after being in a tense and stressful situation. What's your tendency in those situations? Is it to shut down and isolate? Is it to lash out? Is it to distract yourself? You know, I'm not the isolating type. I'm the type that's probably going to lash out. You in Albuquerque are probably thinking, dang, Daniel, you haven't figured that out yet? Nope, I'm still a feisty one when I get a little irritated. I'm more likely to be on the defense or engage in the conflict, not avoid it. Or I might try to distract myself until trouble comes my way and then I'll kind of go after it. But sometimes after a challenging situation, I feel exhausted. And if I'm not connected to Jesus, I'm prone to hurting other people. but not Christ. You see, Jesus was undeterred by the persecution and disrespect of the Pharisees and others who hated him. But all he did was continue to pour himself out compassionately. And as for this man, he was blind and couldn't see Jesus, but Jesus could still see him. Jesus set yet another example of what self-denial looks like. Another example of what loving the unlovable looks like. And and the second portion of Jesus' character I want to highlight is that he was mission-minded. Let's look at verse 4 here. He says, "As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Jesus is mission-minded. It didn't matter when it was. He was always willing to show people the way to the light. He was always willing to tell the truth. Whether he was hungry or tired or coming from one hard situation to the next, he had laser focus on the task at hand. And what was the result of his mission? You and I are here thousands of years later, clinging to every word that he speaks, worshiping him every single week, singing praises to him about his glorious grace, the fact that he laid down his life and taught people what living like God is really all about. The way we were originally intended to live is in fellowship and to love one another deeply. That's the result of Jesus staying mission-minded. And he did it while being loving and compassionate. And third and finally, I want us to trust the process, even when it's messy. So we'll look at verse 6 here, and it says, "After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with his saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. 'Go,' he told him, 'wash in the pool of Siloam.'" This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. A few things I want to point out about this miracle that Jesus performed. The results of this miracle were not immediate. There were times where, Jesus would heal someone and boom, he'd say they were healed and they were healed. There'd be times where he'd say, "Hey, you're no longer dead. Get up." And then they did. But in this example, that's not what happened. This miracle required some obedience from the man who was born blind. And guess what? He obeys. He goes to the pool after Jesus spits in the dirt, makes some mud, and rubs it on his eyes. How many of you would even allow that? And the truth is, there are some situations that we're in that require steps of obedience before the deliverance. And some of you listening, you're watching and you're thinking, and the situation that you're in came directly to your mind. A sin that you can't shake, a relationship you need to address, an apology that you maybe owe, forgiveness that you maybe haven't given, and it plagues you, and you avoid it in your prayer life. How would I know this? Because I'm the same way. And so there's got to be something in your life where God has made clear to you by the people in your life maybe, or by the scriptures, that a step of obedience is required before your deliverance is complete. So what process are you in the middle of? What messy situation can you not seem to be clean from? Because truth is, we all are in the middle of something or on our way out. And if we're already out, then we're probably on our way into something different. So what step of obedience is God waiting for you to take so he can deliver you? I want us to think about for a moment, what would it be like if we couldn't see? Like, I want us to transplant our feet into the shoes of the man who was born blind. And maybe some of you watching have experienced this or are currently experiencing it, and so you know exactly what I'm talking about. But my hope is that by putting ourselves in the shoes of this man born blind, that two things might happen. One, we'll be reminded of what amazing gifts God has given us. And two, we can really feel the gravity of the miracle that ensues in the story, because we can become extremely numb to miracles that Jesus performs. Like, we can read them and think, oh wow, yeah, that's cool, and then just keep on moving like nothing happened. Or we can kind of think, wow, that's too good to be true. But when I think about not being able to see, I think about navigating the most common areas in my life in the dark. Like in my car, or the worst is in my own apartment when I'm walking around the corners at night when I don't want to turn the light on so I don't wake up Nadia, and I like stub my toe on a corner I've walked past 1,000 times. Like, I know it's there, but because I can't see, I stub my toe. Pretty sure you've done that too. Or how about those of us who rely on some type of vision correction, right? Like like glasses or contacts. It's like in the morning when we wake up, we can't see anything because it's blurry. And then we put our glasses on or we put our contacts in, and all of a sudden it's HD vision. How much would your quality of life change if you just couldn't correct your below average vision? Or how about these other reasons? Like, these are a handful of reasons why sight is beautiful to me. And I pray that you relate to these, but watching a beautiful sunrise or a sunset, or looking at the Sandia Mountains out west and seeing them pink and purple as the sun goes down. Or a smile, just a simple smile. I walking around, since outside when people aren't wearing their masks, and seeing a smile, I sometimes realize how much I take for granted seeing a smile. Or seeing a cute baby. I love holding infants because they're just such a miracle. Or a puppy, or any wildlife. Can you imagine not being able to see types of wildlife? Or the power of the ocean and the waves that crumble and crash against the rocks. Or how visually enticing some food can be. My goodness, I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. Or how about other community interaction, like going to a sporting event, an Isotopes game, or in El Paso, I think it's the Chihuahuas. I don't know if that's still the baseball team, but going to a baseball game or a basketball game, or going to a concert. Been to some amazing concerts that were just visually crazy. Or not least of all, worship gatherings. Can you imagine not walking into the fellowship and seeing that person that's going to give you a big old hug? Or some of you are not huggers, so you're like, well, I'd be okay with that. But by and large, seeing people worship and praise God, seeing people pray, seeing people preach the word. Can you imagine not being able to visually experience that? I remember attending the World Discipleship Summit in 2016 in St. Louis and watching 20,000 people sing praises to God. Can't imagine not seeing that. Sight brings understanding. Sight helps us to discern things, places, and situations. Things that are safe versus things that are not. Sight gives us a sense of direction. Sight provokes emotion. Sight influences our mind in the way that we make decisions. Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 and 23. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So considering that passage, how significant is it that this man has been blind from birth? How would your life be different if you were in his shoes? What we choose to view with our eyes has a huge impact on our life. What are you allowing your eyes to see? Ultimately, this passage goes on, and this man gets into an argument with the Pharisees, and they get mad because Jesus did it on the Sabbath. But as we finish up, Jesus cures our spiritual blindness, just like he cured the physical blindness of this man. But the only way that this happens is if we trust him in the process. Lots of times it takes steps of obedience to get to the other side of our struggle, to get to the other side to where we can understand or we can see. We can trust the process even in our doubt, because we can remember who he is, where we are going, and remembering who is blessed, the people who are brought low. And we can trust the process because Jesus is compassionate and mission-minded and will stop at nothing to save you, to rescue you, and to hold you into his hand. And we can trust the process even when it's messy, because on the other side of the mess, Jesus is waiting to bring us home. I'm grateful that you guys allowed me to share with you this morning. Pray that this has encouraged you in some way, and I'll be praying that we can all trust the process, and also pray that 2020 can give us a break. But I look forward to the next time I get to visit with you guys, and prayerfully it will be in person. And thank you, El Paso, for joining the service. I pray that you guys were encouraged as well. Have a great day.